Hey everybody, welcome back to part 2 of this video. And if you didn't watch the first video, I have that on my channel. It's pretty much just blocking in and getting that background kind of all painted in. I'm at the Dry Creek Trailhead, which is just off of Dry Creek Road in Sedona, Arizona. Usually the parking lot is full, so because it's slow season and like a weekday, I was lucky to find a spot, and there's this beautiful vista point that is just always pretty captivating. And you'll see that I've gone right into working on this beautiful juniper tree that's very like windswept and right on the edge there. It's just a beautiful part of the composition. It really kind of pushes everything that I worked on further into the distance. So I've got this nice darker mass, and the curvature of it really leads you into the background. I want to keep this whole value grouping in the darker key, so all of my colors are going to kind of trend towards a little bit darker values, and that really communicates the depth. What I do love is this one branch here that's kind of spiraling towards you, that's getting hit with sunlight, and that really ties it, I think, together a lot and keeps that tree from also being too heavy, too dark. So my brown here is essentially all my primaries, but more, I would say more of the red yellow dominant for the warmer brown, and then more of the red and blue dominant for the cooler brown, and just adding a little bit of white to those mixtures in various amounts. Obviously for this highlight, there's more like white mixed into that orangey brown. And then you'll see how the needles or the, the greenery of the tree, you'll see kind of on that branch there where I've darkened it, and then where I've put in some of that lighter green. And so the green obviously is, just the ultramarine blue with the cad yellow medium, and then a little bit of that alizarin crimson to desaturate it, and a little bit of white for where there's more light hitting the tree. So the direction of the sun is really important, and everything needs to kind of communicate that. So the light is coming in from the right side of me. It's not super high up in the sky. It's pretty, it's pretty high for like between 7 and 8 a.m., but it's still low to where you get some really nice light and shadow, and it's not just overhead and, kind of creating a flat light. There's a lot of dimension here because of the angle of the light, so I'm communicating that with the form. I've got, the dark where it rounds away, and then, those transitions where I'll mix the light into dark are going to be important too. There is a little bit of, local lighter value on that tree, on that juniper trunk. So because it's not getting that direct light, that's going to be like a cooler highlight. You'll kind of see behind this branch that's getting hit with light, there's a little bit of like light purple. And it's dark and it's cool, so it still recedes behind, but it still feels like there's form going on in the tree. It's not just like a dark branch. There's, you know, obviously still some light happening within the shadows, and that's something I really love to communicate because it just brings it to a whole nother level. And it feels like you're there looking at it, because when you're standing in front of something, you know, your mind is making sense of three-dimensional space, and your eye is the lens, and it's translating all of that information. So I think, you know, with painting, there's a lot more potential to translate that three-dimensional experience versus, you know, like taking a photo or taking a video. There's a lot of like fine tuning on this tree. You'll notice that there's like a range of warm and cool. And little bits of like kind of like a light blue mixed onto certain spots where the sky is reflecting. And some of those sky holes in the lower part of the tree are going to have to match what's behind it. So like maybe more purple or blue. And then when the tree goes up into the sky, those sky holes are going to be the sky color. And then what I think I've also done is kind of darkened that edge of the tree a bit more so that it really like stands out from the background. And that creates just a strong sense of depth. You will notice that in the video, there's some stronger light happening on that tree in the greens. But I'm avoiding going too light or warm with that because I don't want to take too much attention away from the background. So because that is my focal point, I don't want to create like too much contrast in the tree to where it would kind of compete, because this juniper has a lot of character and there's potential, you know, for it to compete with this background here. And, you know, I kind of want you to feel like you're rounding this corner and getting this just like awe-inspiring vista, which is what's happening here. And it's just really beautiful. People often ask me how I like paint outside when the light is changing. You'll see that that's doing that right now, and sometimes it happens pretty quickly, but all you really need is information on, you know, where the light and shadow is, and as soon as you get that blocked in, you know, the light will kind of move in and out, and you can work on other parts of the painting when the light that you want kind of goes away, and then go back to it if you need to say like, oh, you know, I have my light and shadow, but I forgot kind of what that transition looks like. So that's the nice thing about, you know, spending a couple hours on a painting or coming out for another session. You can really just study what the light is doing, even if it's, you know, changing. A lot of times, you know, we use our memory of what we saw maybe a couple minutes prior. And it's actually amazing how much we actually can remember and piece things together when we kind of train our mind to work in that way. it's true observation. So you're really like looking deeply into something. And it's such a good practice, I think, especially now when there's so much like instant gratification, just look and take a picture. It's like, are we really looking at things? And that's the thing that I love the most about painting is, you know, in this fast-paced world when, you know, we're not really maybe paying attention in the same way because there's so much like, you know, demanding our attention. And it's very liberating to feel like you can kind of get that back and just, you know, become more in touch with your surroundings and kind of get out of the mind and, you know, lend yourself to receiving, you know, the light and the beauty around you in every moment. I haven't really talked about these rocks at all that I've placed in the foreground. I think they really offer something key to the composition. They kind of further balance out the weight. There's a lot of weight on the you know, upper left side of the painting. And I feel like putting these rocks under the tree, well, first of all, they're there. And I love, you know, kind of recording the truth of what I see. Inventing is great too. And, you know, is important sometimes, but the way that these rocks are placed, I think is pretty perfect. There's just a couple of, you know, big rocks that have an interesting play of light. And what that does is it kind of, it both balances the scene and it invites you in a little bit more. It creates more of a path for the viewer. You have those two trees, the smaller one that's below the cliffs, and then this big juniper. And then you have this, you know, foreground that kind of leads you in, and it creates this bumper. And just showing you kind of the direction of the light. It's coming in through these cliffs right next to me. And the rocks are they're receiving that, that light. They are a very similar color to the foreground. So I kind of have to decide, you know, are my highlights going to be on the sides of the rock or more on, you know, bits of that ground plane? And it does feel like the sides of the rock are receiving more of that direct light because they're more, you know, upright, and, you know, the ground is getting a little more like shadow, and there's more variation in the ground. It's also receiving some light from the sky. Another benefit of just kind of blocking out that underpainting is that, you know, you can gauge the values a little more clearly. Right now, the highlights on the rocks don't really feel as light because I haven't gone in and blocked in that yellowy wash yet. So I'll come back to that. Underneath the rock is where it's darkest, and then I've kind of got like a cooler, like shaded side of the rock that I've mixed. So, you know, varying amounts of alizarin crimson and cadmium yellow medium with the white, just a touch of blue to make it not quite as orange. And as I've been talking about the rocks, I've been, you know, just feathering out this tree a little bit more. I can, you know, kind of get into refining with a lot of these things. And it's nice to do this all over painting like to jump around, and that way when you come back to a section that you were working on, you might be able to see something that you didn't before. So it kind of gives your mind a rest from focusing on that one particular thing, and then you can see how it relates to the bigger picture again. So another strategy, you know, walking away from the easel helps, like getting some distance on it, but then also working on other parts of the painting. And that rock that has like more of the flat top, I don't know if I really communicated that. It's receiving more light from the sky, so that's like a cooler shadow than the side of that other rock next to it. You'll notice how much it's clouded over, and that's why it's so important to, you know, get in your shadows like really in the beginning of the painting, because, you know, the weather can really change throughout even a single session. The light is pretty diffused, so I'm still getting this shadow of the tree on the ground. But I'm kind of upping the contrast because I want it to, you know, I don't really have any clouds in the sky at all. It was a, you know, a very like, I started with that blue sky, and you know, I've been looking at this long enough to really to know how that shadow and light interact with each other on the ground. But this would be something that, you know, I should have blocked in the start of the painting. So all those, you know, little details, I definitely wasn't anticipating it clouding over. But like I said, the light isn't so overcast. Like, you know, there's still sun coming through, that I can see that shadow versus the light on the ground plane. But now the rocks are definitely making more sense spatially as I'm working on this foreground here. And it's also harder to gauge the difference between the ground light and the light hitting the rocks now because of that cloudiness. I just added a little bit of, you know, kind of shadow under the tree. I don't really want to put those grasses there underneath, because I feel like it would just be a little too much information for that corner. So I've invented, you know, a little bit of where I think that shadow should go. And then I put some darker accents at the base of the tree, which is basically just like, you know, the alizarin crimson with ultramarine blue, no white mixed into it. And then just a tiny bit of yellow so that it's not like, you know, too purple. And I'm going into this shadow with my red rock foreground color and just really figuring out, like, you know, standing back and moving up close and thinking, you know, how much of this shadow do I want to communicate? And this red rock color is somewhere between the light and the shade of the rocks that I've put in. So they are pretty close together, but they are still reading as separate. I've still got, you know, that highlight on the rocks, and I'll continue to refine that a bit so that they stand out as a shape. And what also helps is kind of communicating more of that shadow on the rock. I've got like a nice crack on this rock where there's more of like a mid-tone as it's rounding from dark into light. So I'll kind of add that in there, but I want to darken the side of this rock too. Cool it down a little bit as well. And even just by doing that, the side of it that's getting more direct light is feeling lighter. And just as I've been painting, the lights come out a little bit more. So I'm going to go back into that tree shadow and kind of figure out where I want to go with this. I've kind of moved these rocks a bit closer up and to the left, so it will intersect with that shadow, and I feel like that makes it pop a little bit more from the ground plane. And there is this like natural curvature of the slope, and the shadow is matching that currently. But, you know, I think eventually I'll go and just straighten that out a little bit. And a little bit more pink in this ground color here. So I'll probably like add more yellow to it. Got like a strong yellow on that highlight of the rocks, so I want to be careful not to match that too much. You'll notice with dappled light, you know, in tree shadows, they're never usually like just like one big opaque mass. They have a lot going on in them. That dappling effect where there's the holes in the shadow, and some of those are like more of the ground color, kind of more in between the light and the shadow, and then depending on where the light is, that dappled light can be quite bright and luminous. And so I'm not getting too much of that right now, but I have it in mind that I do want to have that shadow broken up a little bit more and transitioning into the ground plane in a smoother way. You'll see how I've added more reflected skylight into that top rock. And then adding a little bit of highlight to the ground plane. What I'll do is add in some of those midtones to break it up a little and unify that more into the foreground. I think that creates a nice division of space. It brings, you know, the foreground closer up. And then these trees to the left haven't gotten too much attention. They've got their core shadow. So I'm gonna mix the middle tone right now. And these trees have a pretty similar range of color and temperature as the juniper. They are a little bit more blue to communicate that they're behind. And they're definitely receiving like more light on the side. So I'm gonna paint that in. I'm gonna mix like a lighter green and just hit the edge of that with the light. And make sure that I get get that highlight at the top of the tree, because it's kind of meeting the shadow of the cliffs, and I want that to feel like it's popping out a little bit. And you'll notice, you know, some of the trees are actually right underneath the cliffs that are getting hit with direct light, and I moved them more to the left because I didn't want to create like a repetitive shape, and I didn't want them to compete. So you have such a beautiful light coming in right there that if I put the tree right under the cliff at that point, it would you know, not get the attention it deserves. So, you know, everything that I'm painting is very intentional. And they're decisions that I make as the light is happening. So there's a lot of design choices, color choices. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made. And you kind of have to stick with them. Otherwise, you know, the painting can get muddy pretty quickly and it can fall apart. So, you know, you don't always make the best decisions, but if you make at least the decision and you stick with it, you can have some clarity in the painting. So at this point, everything is just getting refined. I'm adding those dark accents under the rocks where they meet the shadow. And this is a little different approach from my usual painting. I try to get everything blocked in and then refine, which is definitely the better way to do it. But I was pretty confident in my design and in my value groups that I felt like I could kind of, you know, work on different parts of the scene as opposed to just blocking it all in first. And you'll notice I've really, you know, gotten my temperature and values figured out in that ground plane so that the rocks stand out from it. There are these little yucca plants next to those foreground trees on the left that I feel like adding in, you know, there's a lot of simplicity in this scene, so I feel like adding in a couple of these other details is okay. And, you know, it's not super obvious, but it is something when you look up close to the painting that you notice and just kind of brings that element, you know, that character of the high desert. It brings that home a little bit more so even, you know, the sense of place and the particular geology and vegetation is really special. So, you know, trying to get in those forms where I can. And obviously not adding like too much detail to those distant yuccas, like keeping them just kind of gestural. You might not even necessarily, you know, notice what they are. You might be like, oh, is that some green sage? But that's not really the point. It's just part of the little details that I've added in here. And balancing those out with some like little green grasses under the tree. So this is the finished piece. It's got, you know, the atmosphere that I was looking for and, you know, pretty solid composition. So really happy with how it turned out and super excited I could share it with you guys. Like I said, it took 2 sessions and yeah, just signing my name into the bottom here. I'll use my car keys or like a little like wiper tool. sometimes I'll just use whatever's in my pocket, like a pen or a razor blade or something. But the point is lifting the paint. So that's how I usually do my signature is, you know, lifting the paint rather than painting it on. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.